Man, I'd love to be able to just get up and let it rip like that, eh? Steve Perry, ooh, what a voice. I actually, just in getting ready for this message, was checking out what he's up to these days. I didn't realize he's kind of in reclusion for a number of years and hasn't been doing much public stuff at all. And then just this last year, he's done a couple of small concerts, or sort of took part in a couple of small concerts, I'll say. And I saw him singing. He's 67 years old and he can still wail. It's just like, what a set of pipes. Anyways, I'm not going to give you a rip of that today. Love you all too much for that. So you can rest easy. We're going to actually dive in and talk about faith and doubt today. Before we do, though, I saw geese yesterday. And so talking about faith, I have got faith that summer is coming earlier than usual. Two of them, the geese were headed south, though, at the time, so take that for what it's worth. Maybe they think it's fall after the nicest winters we've had so far. I hope that's not the case. Okay, anyways, our text for today is Genesis 1 through to Revelation 22. I hope you all had breakfast. When we talk about faith today, it's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? And there are so many thoughts about faith. The perspectives are so diverse. And in essence, it comes down to leaving faith really largely undefined in our society. And the cloudiness, I think, of that scenario is further complicated by the fact that people are encouraged nowadays to define their own faith. We're encouraged to go out and sort of build it yourself. Figure it out on your own. And as a result, we get to this point where we're wandering around in well, what's faith to you? What's faith to me? Well, what do you believe? What do I believe? And as a result, the whole topic can get nebulous really quickly. At that point, I think what happens is that faith starts to drift into the realm of esoteric beliefs or abstract philosophies. Things that we just can't understand or that are so private to each one of us that we don't talk about them with each other. And then it gets cloudier again when we start to talk about, well, where does faith come from? What's the source of faith? Is it outside of ourselves, or does it have to come from within each one of us? And I don't think it's really hard to understand that when we're told that we should define our own faith, that oftentimes then we lead down that road that says that we should figure it out and somehow conjure it up from within ourselves. So that leaves us on our own thinking, well, if I take some optimism and then I put it together with some positive thinking and add some warm, fuzzy thoughts, then sprinkle it on the challenges that I face or the unknown situation that I'm encountering, that I'm in the middle of in my life, well, then somehow it's all going to come together and work out. Or if I just believe really hard, if I just believe that I can figure this out and get through it and that it's going to work out, well, then I'll be okay. I just got to bear down. And when that doesn't work, then we're just told, well, we'll just go back and start again. Go back to the drawing board, reshuffle the deck, and see if you can figure it out properly this time. And as a result of that, we see this disparity of thoughts and opinions about what faith is all about and how it works, where it comes from. I saw this play out in 3D as people encountered my sister when she was diagnosed and was going through cancer a number of years ago. Now, Kathy was 34, 35 at the time, and she was fairly irreverent when it came to her cancer scenario. So you need to know that sort of to understand this. When she was diagnosed, it was funny one day, I was working at the store and she came in and she was hanging out, and as she was hanging out with us, then a lady came in that had just heard that Kathy had been diagnosed, and so the lady came up, and so she was asking Kathy questions and trying to find out what was going on in her world, and so finally she just got to the point where she said, well, what kind of cancer were you diagnosed with? And Kathy, just because it was Kathy, she leaned on the counter and she got all serious. And she said, well, we've ruled out testicular. And we're pretty sure it's not prostate. And this woman was horrified. What have I done? I should never have said anything. So Kathy, she just rolled with it. She just kind of, hey, it is what it is, and since it is, then let's have fun. We were going to a concert, actually. Kathy had been on chemo, and when you come off of chemo, and all your counts are down, your blood counts are down, and you're that much more susceptible to germs and things like that. There's always that concern that you shouldn't be going out in public. But there's this concert in Edmonton, and Kathy really wanted to go, and her blood count came up to just the point where she was able to go. The doctor said it was all right. And as a matter of fact, the doctor even came with her to this concert. And so we were going to this concert, and because Kathy was so irreverent about this whole thing and really didn't get bogged down by it, what I did was I went out to the hardware store and I grabbed the safety kit. It had the goggles and dust mask protector and earplugs and things like this, and went back to the office and I built a label for it and called it a mobile quarantine kit. So they arrive, and I get out and I said, Kathy, we got nothing to worry about, this whole issue with germs. And so I threw her this kit, and she sees it and starts to look at it, and she just howls, thinks this is awesome, right? Really funny. And the doctor's sitting there going, oh, no, that's not going to work. But that was Kathy. I could joke with her about it, and she would roll with that, and she just kind of trundled along through this whole cancer thing. And for those of us that were around Kathy and were able to watch people encounter her and the positive perspective that she had with it, it was fascinating because, number one, they always attributed her positive attitude to her faith. I was always intrigued by that. I just throw that out there as a thought. As soon as they saw her positive attitude concerning her cancer, they thought that it somehow had something to do with faith. But it was clear that they didn't understand really how that worked. And that was apparent because they would ask questions, or they would make comments that would go like this, like, wow, I wonder where she gets her faith. Or, I don't know how she can have that much faith. Or, boy, I wish I could have that much faith. Kathy's approach was a conundrum for a bunch of people. It just begged questions in their mind. And since then, that was 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, and since then I think the confusion has just gotten worse in our society today. The recipes for faith, or some sort of an approximate to that, just keep coming. And the theories just keep arriving. Hey, how about we take 4 parts positive thinking and add in 3 parts of self-actualization, and you'll be good. It's all going to be fine. And then to compound it once more, this whole malaise that results in our society from this lack of a specific definition, a prevailing definition of what faith is it's compounded by the mores of our society. I love using that word mores. Makes me feel better about all the money I spent in university. If you're not sure what mores are, let me save you a few bucks. Mores are really social conventions or social customs that prevail in a society, things that we abide by. They're unspoken rules and regulations, if you will. And the one that we find over and over in our society today is that we don't challenge anything. We just accept everyone's perspective. And it stands as legitimate. We live in that live. In our society today, nobody calls baloney. And so as a result of that, when it comes to faith, there's so much nonsense floating around out there, so much garbage. And as a result of all of this combined, I think people are confused and they're frustrated when it comes to this whole idea of faith. They can't figure it out, just can't seem to make sense of it. And at that point, they either walk away because it just makes my head hurt, or they conclude that faith is only attainable by some people. Only some of them can come up with that answer. Maybe you're here this morning and you're at that point where faith just hurts your head. You're looking for something in your world. You've got issues, you've got challenges, and you're looking for something. You need help. Maybe there's something here at church. Well, I'm glad that you're here because we're going to dive into it, and we're going to try and take this whole topic of faith, and we're going to try and condense it down into some bite-sized chunks that will help us to start and move forward as we talk about faith, and then as we do the same, looking at doubt. Let's begin with a definition. Faith is confidence or trust in someone or something. That's the definition of faith. So when it comes to Christianity, and I would dare say this morning, right from the outset, that this is the only place to begin to look for true faith, the only place that you're going to find an answer that will satisfy you is in Christianity, because Christianity boils down to faith in someone, namely Jesus Christ. It's not something, it is someone, Jesus Christ. So then to say that we have faith in Jesus Christ is to say that we have confidence or trust that Jesus Christ is who he says he is and that he can do what he says he can do. Okay, so then personalizing faith, my faith is when I say that I am confident, I'm convinced that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he can do what he says he will do and that he won't do what he says he won't do. And so when I come to that point, when I take that step of faith and cross over that line to where I say, I believe that, I've come to that point where I believe that God is who he says he is, and that he can do what he says he will do, then that is the initial point of faith. That is our first step of faith. But that's not the end of it. It carries on from there. And at that point, I'm going to suggest this morning, I'm going to present to you three things that happen at that point. So let's take a look at three different verses. We're going to start off with Romans chapter 12, verse 3. Romans chapter 12, verse 3. Paul says here, "For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourselves with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you." Okay, so why is that significant? When we consider that we take our first step of faith being to trust in God, that He is who He is, and that He can do what He can do, then it's interesting, we need to note that then God leans in and says, upon that faith, I am going to grant you more faith. I am going to give you more faith than even that it took to accomplish that step. He works in and through us with by means of the Holy Spirit to bring us to that point where we can take that initial step of faith and cross over that line to belief and trust in Jesus Christ. But then He leans in and says, and now here's more faith. I don't know if you've ever met somebody that has just come to that point where they've taken that step across that line. And all of a sudden you see them all connecting dots. Like all of a sudden then faith starts to take on a whole new meaning to them. They move to a whole new level of it in just stepping across that line. I believe that's God leaning in and saying, okay, now that you're playing, now that you're in the game, here you go. Here's some more faith that you can take and run with. So when we take our initial step, then God leans in as well, and He grants us more faith, which is to say more confidence in Him. But that's not where it ends either. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 15 gives us another clue as to what's going on, what happens next. Our hope is that as your faith continues to grow, our sphere of activity among you will greatly expand. Paul again speaking to the Corinthians. But note, as your faith continues to grow, Paul says. So, when you take your first step of faith and then God leans in and gives you more faith, that is still not the end. You have not achieved faith at that point. That's where you begin to build on it yourself as you grow in your knowledge of God. So faith isn't static. It is dynamic. We can grow in it. And not only grow in it. Look at 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 2. Again, Paul speaking to the Thessalonians. Paul says, we sent Timothy, who is our brother and co-worker in God's service in spreading the gospel of Christ, to strengthen and encourage you in your faith. So not only then can we grow in our faith, but we can be strengthened in our faith as well. Not only can we become more broad in our faith, but we can build our faith stronger. Bigger and stronger. How? How do we build our faith bigger and stronger? Go back again. Paul says, we sent Timothy, who is our brother and co-worker in God's service, in spreading the gospel of Christ. So Timothy came to strengthen and encourage them. So we can be strengthened and encouraged in our faith when we hear more about God, when we understand better who He is, when we come to know what He says He will do, when He will do it, how He will do it, what He won't do. We can grow in our faith. Our faith can get stronger as we grow in our knowledge of God. That will become important in just a minute as we talk about doubt. But so often, too often, we leave our faith at that initial decision. We take that step of faith. We come to that point where we say, you know what? I actually do believe this. I do believe that God is who He says He is. And I do believe that He can do what He says He can do. And we think, sweet, I'm good to go. And we turn back to our regularly scheduled life, off and running, thinking that we've got the bases covered, thinking that it's all good now. I know where my eternity's at. I'm good to go. And so we launch back, leaving it at that, never having taken the time to grow in our faith. And that can lead us into trouble. Because at some point, we're going to get thrown a curve that's going to completely blindside us. And at that point, then our faith train comes off the tracks. Talk about a crazy train. All of a sudden it blows up. And we start to think to ourselves, wait a second. Is this whole God thing legit? I'm not sure. And I'm going to mention something else too at this point. If you are new in your faith, if you're immature, a baby in your faith, if you will, this is something to really be aware of. Because oftentimes what will happen is that if we've never taken the time to grow in our faith, if we've never really pursued God and leaned into Him and learned about Him and all that He says, then what happens is we come along and we'll take a verse, we'll hear a message, and we'll park on that puppy, and we'll head off and make our whole faith suit that verse, fit around that verse. We'll draft our whole theology in order to accomplish that. Let me give you an example. Psalm 37, verse 4 says, "Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Now, when we see that verse the first time, we think we've hit the mother lode, don't we? Oh yeah, baby. I delight in the Lord. Oh, do I delight in the Lord. He is awesome. And by the way, I really desire a Ferrari. In my heart, I want one. I think it would help my witness. I think it would help my testimony if I cruised up in a 488. Right? We launch off into life with this idea that if I just take delight in God, well then, cha-ching, it pays dividends. And that can lead us right over a cliff. We can't take bits and pieces and cobble it into a theology that ends up making God into somebody that He's not, and make Him out to say things that He doesn't, because it just doesn't work that way. So when we don't grow in our faith, we're susceptible to that potential. Before we go down that road, though, let me just ask you, can I ask 2 questions? Number 1, are you growing in your faith today? Are you moving forward with God? Are you doing the things that you need to do to learn about Him? That's why it's so important that we do some of these things here. All of them, in fact. We need to be reading our Bibles. In our GRIP reading plan, I'd love to be able to tell you that we were this intentional, that we were this well thought out, but I can't. If you're keeping up with the reading plan, if you're where you're supposed to be right now, this week you should have been starting Romans in the New Testament. And Romans is a tour de force book on the whole concept and the whole topic of faith. Man, read it. Paul has so much to say. He unpacks it so well. So we need to read our Bibles, find out what God has to say about Himself, about how He operates. We need to commit to coming to church. The Bible tells us, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. It's not just a rule. It's not just some requirement that God lays down. The point is that when we come together and when we learn together, we grow stronger in our faith. When we forfeit that opportunity, then we don't necessarily meet the potential of our faith. We don't build it as far as it can go. We don't make it as strong as it could be, which can be a problem. Be in a small group. Last week we heard 3 testimonies. Each one of them talked about how being in a small group has affected their lives for the better. How it has made such an impact for them to be together with a group of people and come together and just learn from each other about our faith. Lastly, have a spiritual mentor. It's important to have a spiritual mentor. Do you have somebody in your life that is a few miles ahead of you in their faith, that has been around the block a few more times, that you can learn from, that you can bounce off things, help you to navigate, to understand, to make sure that you're catching all of what God has to say and getting it right? Can I ask a second question? Are you helping somebody to grow in their faith this morning? Are you coming alongside of them and helping them to grow? When we take that step of faith, and when we begin to grow in our faith, one of the things that we find is that we have a role to play in the faith of others around us. And again, in our society, man, we need everybody. We need all hands on deck, helping us to show others that there's a difference between the nonsense that they're getting fed and real, true faith, saving faith in Christ. Christ himself told us in John 16, verse 33, that in this world you will have problems. You will have trouble. So sooner or later, we're going to come to that place where life throws us a curve. God tells us we can bank on it. Which is to say, it brings us to this whole issue of doubt. So, now like faith, doubt is a topic that we could unpack for a number of weeks. So this morning, I hope you'll be okay with the fact we're just going to kind of hit some of the big spots so that we can let you go. So we'll take a look at doubt from the 40,000-foot level, if you will. First of all, I think it's important for us to understand that doubt is natural for any thinking person. I don't think that it is unreal or unreasonable for us to have doubts. We have them every day about virtually everything, don't we? Oh, did I take the wrong salad dressing? Should I have gone with the Thousand Island or should I just gone with the Italian? Right? We question ourselves. How about this one? How do you like my outfit? Was this the right one? Does this go together? I hate that one. Did I buy the right vehicle? When I sold vehicles, one of the things that we did was second or third day we would call people that had just bought a car or a truck, and we would tell them, good job, you picked the right one. Because there's this thing called buyer's remorse, where you second guess and you question what you've just done. We always wanted them to be confident that they'd made the right decision. We question, oh, did I buy the right vehicle? Should I buy that house? Oh, I don't know if I... We have these doubts. Doubts are really a question or a concern that leads to a lack of confidence. So when it comes to faith then, when it comes to our faith, doubt is when we question whether God is who he says he is, or we question that he can do what he says he can do. You know, this here is a size 20 shoe. But it's also a security system. You know, if I take this shoe and I throw that on the step outside the door of my house, people come along and they look at that and they wonder about what's on the other side of that door. Right? So, a burglar that's been sitting and watching my house might be convinced that there's nobody there. They might be sure that they haven't seen any activity, but if they come up to my door and just before they go to use the bar to break through, they look down and they see that, maybe at that point they wonder, ooh, have they just been asleep? Maybe I should just go to the neighbors. right? Satan is busy leaving shoes on the doorstep of our lives every day. He throws them out there so that you'll question, or so that he can sow the seed of doubt in your mind about who God is, about whether he is actually able to do what he says he can do. So the question today about doubt is not really whether or not we're going to have them. The question, I think, is what we do with them when they come. How do we respond? The doubt is really sort of just like temptation in that respect. The problem isn't in having the doubt. The problem comes in responding incorrectly, the wrong way. That's what leads to the problem. When we encounter a doubt, we've basically got, just really simply speaking, we've basically got two options. We either pull away from God and turn in a different direction, or, number two, we can engage in it. We can actually lean into God concerning the doubt and say, okay, God, what's up with this? What about this? We can pursue our doubts with God. He's up to it. He knows that you have them, and He's good for that. Take your doubts to Him. Engage with Him in your doubt. And He'll engage back with you. He'll reciprocate. So of the two options, pull back and turn away or engage, can I encourage you this morning? Go with option number 2. Lean in. Engage with God. Now you said this morning, well, Doug, yeah, that's all good, dude. You're the pastor. That's what you're supposed to tell us. And you're right. It wouldn't be much of a pastor if I wasn't telling you this morning to lean into God. But can I also tell you something else? I wouldn't be a pastor if I hadn't found this to be true. If I hadn't found out that when I have a doubt, I can go to God with that I can engage with Him in that, and then He will meet me there. You know, I've had an amazing life. Straight up. It's been sweet. But I've also had some challenges as a part of it. And those challenges have come with doubts. I mentioned before, my cousin was 16 when he passed away. I was just 17. We were tight. Kathy died when she was 37. My dad died when he was 45. And at each step of the way, my kids have got health issues. I look around at each of these steps. There's doubts. What kind of God allows pain and suffering? Does God actually love me? Really? Does God have a plan for my life? Why them? Why pick on them? It's not fair. Why won't you heal her? How about just once? Do you really care, honestly? And here's what I've found. That though God hasn't answered those situations in my life the way that I wanted Him to yet, not once so far, He nonetheless has met me in each circumstance and revealed himself to me in ways that I cannot deny, that are specific to me, personal to me. And today, I can tell you that I am more convinced than ever that God is who he says he is, and that he will do what he says he will do. And even if he chooses not to answer my prayers or address my concerns the way that I hope, that he will be there with us all the way through and make all the difference in having to navigate the situations that he asks of us or that we're presented with. By God's grace, I've come to that point where I can identify with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In Daniel 3, verses 17 and 18, they say, this is, if you remember, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wouldn't bow down to the idol of King Nebuchadnezzar, that megalomaniac that was making everybody bow down to him. He was pretty impressed with himself. And he's saying, if you don't bow down, you go in the fire, right into the furnace. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say this, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Note again, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. Not that he's necessarily going to, he is able to. Kathy used to say, Doug, don't worry about praying for healing for me. I know I'm going to be healed. Here or there, one way or the other, I'm going to be healed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He is able to deliver us from us, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. One way or the other, he's going to deliver us. But even if he does not deliver us from this furnace, from this fire, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not stop believing. And I can testify that he will do the same for you and me as we lean into him when we encounter doubts. He will bring us to that point where we can get through the challenges of our life and not stop believing. It's appropriate this morning that we're celebrating communion, because this is the initial step that we take of faith. This signifies the fact that we have come to the point where we place our trust in God, that we believe that he actually did come to earth and die for us, that Christ came, sacrificed his life for ours, died on the cross, shed his blood so that our sins could be forgiven and we could have a restored relationship with God. This is the point that it all begins when we talk about faith. So as the servers come, as we prepare to take part in this together, I just want you to know that there's only a few requirements for communion this morning. You don't have to be a member of this church. All that it requires is that you have taken that step of faith. That at some point in your life, you've come to that point where you say, I do believe that God is who he says he is and that he can do what he says he can do. And I trust that he has died in my place for the forgiveness of my sins. If you've done that, you're free to participate. If you have an issue with a brother, though, then God says, at that point, then don't participate. Because he tells us that when we do that, when we don't have our relationships right with one another, then we can't have a relationship that's right with him. And when we participate in communion, at that point, then we're bringing condemnation on ourselves. And we can't participate in communion if our lives aren't right before God this morning, if there is unconfessed sin, unresolved sin in our life. So if that's your situation this morning, then I'd ask you to just let the plate pass by until you can get that resolved with him. The servers are going to pass out the elements. If you just hang on to them, then We'll wait until everyone's been served, and then we'll partake together. I'll pray, and then we'll partake together, and we'll go from there. If you've never come to that point, excuse me, where you've taken that first step of faith, where you've placed your trust in Jesus Christ to have paid the penalty for your sin, man, we'd love to talk to you about that. Encourage you to come and talk to any of us as staff or maybe somebody that's brought you. We're going to talk about that in a couple weeks when we take on some AC/DC Highway to Hell. Come back for that. Or maybe you're here this morning and you've made that initial step of faith, but you're not growing. You need to move forward in that. I encourage you, dive into some of those things that we talked about. Come talk to us again. We'll help you to get plugged in and doing something. And maybe you're not investing in someone else. You've made that step, but you're not helping others to find their faith. Can I encourage you to do that as well? You'll grow in your faith as a result of that even. This morning, this little wafer is symbolic of Christ's body that was broken for us, just as we've been reading about in Leviticus. The sacrifice, he was the perfect sacrifice. The sacrifice to end all those other sacrifices. And the juice just represents his blood, which is shed for us, for our forgiveness of sins. The Bible tells us that there is not forgiveness of sin without the shedding of blood. So as we eat and drink together, we remember what Christ has done for us. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your sacrifice on our behalf. Thank you for giving your life for ours, so that in your death we could find life with you. And in your resurrection, God, you bring us into restored relationship with God. Help us today, God, to move forward in our faith. Help us to grow beyond this initial step. First to take it, but then to grow beyond it, so that we could become more like you, that we could be more effective for you, that you would be able to work in our lives and help us to navigate and enjoy life as you originally designed for us. So we ask all these things now in your precious name. Amen. Let's eat and drink together. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you coming out. Look forward to seeing you next week. Ryan's going to be dialing it up with a little bit of money for nothing. See you then.